The Hunter Valley grade rises to 1 in 40. It is before dawn. A machine 108 feet long and 291 tons in working order is climbing this grade with 1,150 tons behind it. Alone. No banking locomotive. No pilot engine ahead. This is the NSWG RAD-60 class Beyer Garratt, the most powerful locomotive ever to operate in Australia, built by Beyer, Peacock and Company in Manchester, and put to work on the New South Wales government railways from 1952. 4 cylinders, 32 driving wheels, a boiler at 200 pounds per square inch, a starting tractive effort of 59,560 pounds force. When this locomotive is pressed, it burns 37 kilograms of coal every 60 seconds. That is what pressed means, not at working pace, not at the easy end of the gradient. Pressed, and when it is pressed at that intensity, the fireman is watching something that does not appear in the public history of this locomotive. The coal at the base of the bunker is beginning to smoke, not steam, not exhaust gases. The coal is beginning to smolder. The locomotive is doing this. Coal does not require a flame to begin burning. It requires heat, oxygen, and the right conditions to sustain an exothermic reaction once it starts. For bituminous coal, the type that fueled most New South Wales heavy freight operations, sustained surface heat above approximately 250 degrees Celsius, combined with sufficient airflow, will move oxidation past the threshold into combustion. The AD-60's firebox operated at combustion temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. Its superheater outlet was measured above 350 degrees Celsius during intensive trials. The Garratt configuration placed the firebox at the rear end of the central boiler unit. The coal bunker sat on the rear engine unit, immediately adjacent. The mechanical stoker screw ran from that bunker through the cab floor, indirectly into the firebox throat. The radiant heat from the firebox did not travel far to reach the coal. Before we continue, if this kind of railway history matters to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around the locomotives and railway systems that the standard histories overlooked, the machines that outperformed their celebrated counterparts, the engineering decisions that were ahead of their time, and the railway lines that shaped nations without receiving the recognition they deserved. If that's the kind of documentary worth watching to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us, and we want to hear from you. Did you work on the railways as a driver, a fireman, a fitter, a signalman, a track engineer? Did a parent or grandparent spend their career on a railway that is no longer operating, on a locomotive class that is no longer preserved, or in a workshop that is no longer standing? Leave it in the comments. The people who actually operated these machines know things that do not appear in any published railway history. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the locomotive. The cab ventilation problem on the AD-60 was documented from the first months of service. The crew worked adjacent to a firebox generating heat at the rate of a small power station. The modification fitted to Locomotive 6011 in September 1952, a large tube running from cones ahead of the leading wheels, along the boiler, into the cab, was tested for 3 years. It was removed in 1955. The problem was not solved, it was managed. The class was banned from single-line tunnels entirely. A breakdown in a tunnel would leave the crew trapped in a gap between the locomotive body and the tunnel wall measuring 20 centimeters. The heat, compounded with no airflow, made survival a serious question. Crews running bunker first, coal bunker ahead of the firebox rather than behind, reported marginally better conditions. The NSWGR eventually fitted 30 of the 42 locomotives with dual driving controls precisely to allow this working arrangement on routes where it was practicable. What these accounts reveal collectively is an engineering environment of extreme intensity. 37 kilograms of coal per minute. Firebox gases moving through the flue tubes at temperatures that would melt aluminium. And behind the firebox, separated by the articulation joint and a few feet of cab floor, 14 to 18 tons of New South Wales bituminous coal, high volatile, reactive, being fed continuously through a stoker screw that ran hot. The operational staff who worked these machines in the 1950s and 1960s knew the conditions. They dealt with them as railway workers deal with difficult conditions. They managed it. They adapted. They did not write papers about it. The same boundary was being reached in Victoria from the opposite direction. After the Second World War, New South Wales coalfield disruptions and exhausted Victorian reserves forced a fuel crisis. The Victorian Railways converted much of its fleet to oil firing. For the remainder, the available coal was poor, high in volatile matter, prone to self-heating. In 1948, the VR fitted Locomotive X32, a 282 freight engine, with German Henschel Stug pulverized brown coal equipment. The rebuilt tender held a sealed container of approximately 10 tons of brown coal dust, ground fine and dried, fed by steam-driven screw conveyors to the firebox. Brown coal dust at that particle size and moisture content has a spontaneous ignition temperature documented in engineering literature well below that of lump bituminous coal. The sealed container design was partly an engineering response to that known risk. The VR engineers knew what they were carrying in that tender. In France, André Chapelon had completed the 242A1 in 1946, a four-cylinder compound 484, rebuilt from a failed pre-war design. It achieved peak output of 5,500 horsepower. Its Houlet superheater outlet temperature reached 400 degrees Celsius. In trials on the Paris to Le Mans route in 1952, it beat the best time set by modern SNCF electric locomotives by 16 minutes. The SNCF was building an electrified future. A steam locomotive outperforming electric traction was not the story they wanted on the record. The 242A1 was withdrawn from service in 1960, scrapped quietly. No further examples were built. The AD60's last revenue run was on the 23rd of February, 1973, Locomotive 6042, from Awaba State Mine to Wangi Power Station, a coal train. To the last working day of steam in New South Wales, it was coal. Of the 42 built, 38 went to the scrapyard. 4 survived. The 242A1 is gone. The X32 experiment is a footnote. What connects them is not a category or a classification. It is a temperature, a threshold that the most extreme steam locomotives in the world were approaching from different directions, in different countries, with different coal, the machines that burned too hot for the history books to discuss easily. The engineering record does not soften this. These locomotives were running at the thermal limits of solid fuel combustion. The coal in the bunker knew it. And the firemen who managed the stoker controls in those hot cabs knew it. What those machines were doing on those gradients, with those loads, at those temperatures, is in the operational logs of the railways that ran them. It is in the memory of the men who drove them. It is not generally in the standard histories. That is what this channel intends to correct. If this is the kind of railway history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more locomotives, more railway systems, and more engineering achievements still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a family member who drove this class, worked in the workshops that maintained it, or operated on the railway that deployed it, tell us in the comments. What did they drive? Which railway? Which depot? Which line? The people who operated these machines are not in the standard histories, but the engineering record depends on what they remember. We want to hear from them.